Here is a small test. Imagine I give you two short stories. One was written by a human. The other was generated by R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens. Could you tell which was which? You might think so. Look for the usual clues. The R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens story will probably be too polished, too predictable. Maybe it will use strangely enthusiastic language. Maybe every paragraph will end with a neat little conclusion. Easy, except researchers have actually tried versions of this experiment, and humans did not perform nearly as well as you might expect. In a recent series of studies, researchers gave adults fictional stories written either by humans or by ChatGPT. Participants were asked to evaluate the stories and, in some experiments, identify which author was human and which was artificial. When people had to distinguish between the two, their performance was around chance. In one experiment, they actually performed worse than chance. Wait, how can people be worse than guessing? The answer appears to be that we are not simply bad at detecting R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens. Sometimes we are confidently looking for the wrong clues. Participants reported using characteristics such as how understandable the language was, but relying on some of those characteristics was associated with worse identification. That makes sense when you think about how quickly R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens writing has changed. A few years ago, generated text could be repetitive, awkward, and obviously strange. Modern language models can produce extremely fluent sentences, and fluency creates a problem. Humans generally like information that is easy to process. Psychologists have studied this broader phenomenon for years. When something is easier to read or understand, it can sometimes feel more familiar, more convincing, or simply better. So imagine you are searching for R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens writing. You expect the machine to sound awkward. Instead, the machine produces something smooth. The human writer produces something unusual, messy, or stylistically difficult. Suddenly, your intuition flips the answer. The human starts looking artificial, and the artificial text starts looking human. There is another fascinating part of the recent study. When participants were simply asked to rate stories, the R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens stories received strong evaluations. But telling people that a story had been written by R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens could reduce how positively they judged it. In other words, authorship itself changed perception. The exact same kind of creative product can feel different once we believe we know who created it. That tells us this is not only a detection problem, it is a category problem. We carry assumptions about what machines should sound like. We also carry assumptions about what humans should sound like. R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens is moving into the space between those assumptions, and that space is getting uncomfortable. Consider some of the supposed signs of R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens writing. Perfect grammar, structured paragraphs, certain phrases, lots of transitions, a slightly generic tone. Those patterns can occur in generated text, but humans also use them. Teachers teach students to write clearly. Companies use style guides. Editors remove mistakes. Professional writers repeat phrases. And millions of people are now exposed to R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens writing every day. That means human writing itself may begin absorbing some of the patterns people associate with machines. The categories can influence each other. Researchers studying large collections of R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens fiction have found statistical differences between machine-generated and human stories. For example, models can show preferences for certain narrative structures, levels of explanation, or ways of resolving a plot. Computers trained to analyze thousands of examples may be able to detect patterns that an ordinary reader cannot. But that is very different from looking at one paragraph and saying, I know an R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens wrote this. That confidence is increasingly difficult to justify, and this creates a much bigger problem. For most of internet history, we usually assumed that words came from people. A review, a comment, a story, a message. Someone had to sit down and produce it. Generative R-Ta-Fish-Ol in TEL-A-Gens changes the cost of producing language. One person can now create enormous amounts of readable text very quickly, so the question is slowly changing. It used to be, can a machine write something that looks human? Increasingly, the answer is yes. The new question is, how will we know where anything came from? And strangely, simply examining the writing may not be enough. that does not mean authorship no longer matters. In many situations, it matters enormously. Journalism, education, science, personal communication, creative work, the origin of information can affect how much we trust it and what we believe it represents. But the lesson from these experiments is uncomfortable. Style alone is not proof. Something that feels like "Our tough fish ol" in TEL a gens may have been written by a person. Something that feels deeply human may have been generated by a machine. So why are we so bad at spotting "Our tough fish ol" in TEL a gens writing? Partly because modern systems have become very good at producing fluent language, but also because humans do not detect authorship directly. We detect patterns. Then we make a guess about what created them. And sometimes our idea of what a human sounds like is just as unreliable as our idea of what a machine sounds like. The next time you read something online and immediately think, "Our tough fish ol" in TEL a gens wrote this, you might be right. But the interesting question is no longer what gave the machine away. It is whether anything actually did.